Something big is happening. Jensen Huang called it deeply painful, and that's not a phrase you hear from the CEO of one of the most valuable companies on the planet very often. But there he was at Computex 2025 in Taipei, telling the world that NVIDIA had just walked away from $15 billion in sales because of US export restrictions on their H200 chips in China. $15 billion gone, and almost immediately after the ban dropped, Huawei started shipping the Ascend 910C. That timing is not a coincidence. That is a calculated move, and NVIDIA knows it. I've been following this story very closely, and the more I dig into it, the more I think people are massively underestimating what Huawei had actually pulled off here. So let's get into it, because there is a lot to unpack. First things first though, what is this chip? The Ascend 910C is Huawei's most powerful AI accelerator available right now, and it's a clever piece of engineering given the constraints Huawei is working under. At its core, it's essentially two Ascend 910B chips co-packaged together using an organic substrate interconnect. Not the most elegant architecture on paper, but the result is surprisingly capable. Roughly 800 teraflops in FP16 mode and 3.2 terabytes per second of memory bandwidth with 128 gigabytes of HBM on board. For context, those numbers put in the same conversation as NVIDIA's H100, a chip that was the state-of-the-art back in 2022. Now, admittedly, the 910C is not matching NVIDIA's Blackwell generation, and I won't pretend it is. NVIDIA's B200 delivers around 2,500 teraflops, which is more than 3 times what the 910C can do on its own. At the individual chip level, NVIDIA still wins decisively. But here's the thing, that's not the whole story. Not even close. Now, Huawei knows their chips aren't going to win in a one-on-one comparison with Blackwell, so they stop playing that game. Instead, they built CloudMatrix 384. This is a rack-scale AI system that clusters 384 Ascend 910C chips together in a full optical mesh network spanning 16 racks. The whole thing is connected using 6,912 optical transceivers running at 800 gigabits per second each, which gives the system over 5.5 petabytes per second of internal bandwidth. And that is a genuinely insane number, and when you look at what CloudMatrix 384 delivers at the system level, the comparison to NVIDIA gets uncomfortable for Santa Clara. According to semi-analysis, the CloudMatrix 384 pumps out roughly 300 petaflops of dense BF16 compute. NVIDIA's GB200 NVL72, their current flagship server product, delivers only around 180 petaflops, so Huawei's system is putting up about 66% more compute. It also packs 3.6 times more HBM memory and 2.1 times more memory bandwidth than the NVL72. The math Huawei is using here is pretty blunt. 5 times as many Ascend chips easily offsets each chip being roughly 1/3 of the individual performance of an NVIDIA Blackwell. It's brute force engineering, and I actually respect the audacity of it. Now, the trade-off is power consumption, and it is a significant one. The CloudMatrix 384 pulls about 559 kilowatts compared to 145 kilowatts for the GB200 NVL72. That's around 3.9 times more power for broadly similar or better aggregate performance. The performance per watt story is rough, no question about it, but China isn't building these clusters in places where power is a major constraint, and they are not selling them globally. They're building AI infrastructure for domestic use, and right now, availability trumps efficiency. Now, here's where I want to be direct about why this matters so much for NVIDIA specifically. China is not a small market. Jensen Huang himself told Analysis that Chinese AI accelerator market is on track to be worth around $50 billion. During NVIDIA's fiscal year 2025, China accounted for $17 billion, or about 13% of their total revenue. Some analysts, like D.A. Davidson's Jill Luria, think that the real real number is closer to 40% when you factor in chip smuggling and indirect sales. Either way, it's enormous. And when the US's government banned H2O exports to China in April 2025, NVIDIA filed an SEC disclosure saying they expected up to $5.5 billion in charges from the move. They couldn't ship an additional $2.5 billion in H2O revenue that quarter alone. Their Q2 outlook reflected an $8 billion loss from H2O restrictions. NVIDIA's stock dropped roughly 19% in the first part of 2025. One Bernstein analyst put it plainly: banning the H2O essentially hands the Chinese AI market to Huawei, and Huawei is taking it. Mass shipments of the 910C started in early 2025, and projections suggest Huawei could ship between 700,000 and up to 1 million Ascend chips across the 910B and 910C lineup in 2025 alone. Baidu, ByteDance, and China Mobile have all reportedly been testing and adopting the 910C based infrastructure, and DeepSeek, which shocked the AI world earlier in 2025 with its efficiency, had been trained on Ascend hardware. This isn't theoretical adoption. This is happening, and it's happening fast. Bernstein forecasted that NVIDIA's AI chip market share in China would fall to 54% in 2025, down from 66% the year before. And Jensen Huang himself said that Computex that NVIDIA's China share had dropped from 95% around the time export control started in 2022 to around 50%. That is a catastrophic erosion of a massive market, and it's accelerating. Now, there is one thing I think gets overlooked in these hardware comparisons, and that's software. NVIDIA's CUDA platform has been built up for almost 2 decades, and it's deeply embedded into every AI framework, every training pipeline, every research lab on the planet. That's a moat that raw teraflops alone can't overcome overnight, and I think a lot of the Huawei is going to destroy NVIDIA skip right past the inconvenient reality. Huawei's CANN software stack, which is what makes the Ascend chips actually usable for AI workloads, is years behind in maturity. Developers who switched from CUDA to CANN face real friction. Debugging is harder, tooling support is thinner, model optimization that works out of the box on an H100 might need significant re-engineering to run efficiently on an Ascend chip. That is a legitimate disadvantage for Huawei outside of China, and it slows adoption significantly wherever engineers have a real choice. But inside China, the choice is increasingly gone. NVIDIA can't sell H100s there. H20s are now blocked. The government has made domestic AI chip adoption a national priority, backed by concrete subsidies that make the 910C's price-performance equation look better on paper than its raw specs alone would suggest. The new generation AI development plan and related policy initiatives essentially guarantee a customer base for Huawei regardless of competitive dynamics. When your competition is legislated out of the market, your government is underwriting part of your customers' bills. The ecosystem gap becomes a lot more manageable. Chinese developers are also getting creative about the software side. There's active work happening to make popular frameworks like PyTorch and Paddle work more smoothly on Ascend hardware. It's not CUDA parity, but the gap is shrinking because there are now real financial incentives to close it. Huawei isn't standing still on the hardware side either. The Ascend 910D is already in testing, reportedly designed to compete more directly with the H100. Beyond that, Huawei has laid out a roadmap that includes the Ascend 950 series and eventually the Ascend 960 and 970, targeting all new instruction set architectures and modern data formats like FP8 and FP4. Their stated goal is 4 zettaflops of FP4 performance by 2028. That is an aggressive target, but the trajectory they're shown over the last 3 years suggests they're serious about it. Meanwhile, NVIDIA is trying to re-enter China with products that don't cross export control thresholds, which basically means hobbled chips that won't satisfy Chinese hyperscales who've already tasted what the 910C clusters can do. It's a very tough spot to negotiate from.